Dr. Yurtsever, co-counsel, ladies and gentlemen. We're present today at the Rumi Forum to hear an invigorating exchange on the following topic. I quote, "Left at the altar, the roller coaster relationship between the Catholics and the Democratic Party," close quote. Now, this is a takeoff on the title of the book, Left at the Altar, How the Democrats Lost the Catholics and How the Catholics Can Save the Democrats. Interesting proposition, isn't it? Michael Sean Winters will be our respondent today. He is our guest of honor. As you know, he writes a daily blog for America Magazine, put out by the Jesuits. He's also a columnist for the Catholic World. Among the many other publications in which his writings have appeared, we number the Washington Post, the New Republic, the New York Times Magazine, Slate.com, City Paper, and even I Tempi. In 2002, during the clergy sexual abuse scandal, he served as an expert commentator for ABC News and was interviewed on air by Peter Jennings for an ABC News special. In late 2003, showing the diversity of command of subjects that he has, he went to work as an assistant speechwriter on the presidential campaign of none other than General Wesley C. Clark. That was down in Little Rock, Arkansas. Doing a couple of other things in the interim, he researched and wrote this book, Left at the Altar. Back up in New York, in Manhattan, New Yorker editor Hendrik Hertzberg wrote, "The opening decade of the 21st century has been marked by a stormy encounter, sometimes a confluence, sometimes a collision between religion and politics." Michael Sean Winters, who is as at home in the library of a theological seminary as he is in the boiler room of a political campaign, is well positioned to navigate the storm. Few observers are as steeped as he is in the theory and practice of politics in both the Roman Catholic Church and the United States of America. And few are as passionately engaged in seeking a redemptive and humane common ground. Close quote. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Michael Sean Winters, and we'll begin with some questions from here and then proceed to some questions from the floor. To open our questions, I should like to suggest that both in late modernity, especially the 20th century, and now in postmodernity, in a totally new world culture, in the 21st century, the single greatest issue confronting us is the issue of the intersection of theology and politics. What faith do we bring to the forum, and what is the proper role of that faith in the forum? Our faith may be the faith of a Sunni Muslim in Turkey. It could be the faith of a Hindu in India, the faith of a Confucianist reviving in China, the faith of a Roman Catholic in New York. Be that as it may, in our global village, the question is the same. Consequently, the issue that we address today is one of the most significant issues that could be addressed anywhere in the world today. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is ask Michael Sean to give us, if you'd be so kind, a quick background on how it is that we're talking about the Democratic Party and the Catholic Church. There would seem to be a disjunction, and this is just how sharp the disjunction is. 2 years ago, I was at the Democratic State Party Convention in Massachusetts, one of the most democratic states in the Union, and I happened to be at a table that was espousing some common ground Catholic issues. A young reporter from a major newspaper in Boston walked up and said, "You're a Democrat." I said, "Yes." "But you're a Catholic." I said, "Where did that but come from?" They said, "Well, you can't be both. You're either Democrat or you're Catholic. Which is it? Why are you at this thing here?" And I said, "Young man, you're a reporter. You like to ask questions. I'd like you to go home tonight. I'd like you to ask your father a question and have Grandpa get on the line and have the two of them tell you about Great-Grandpa. You're going to discover something when you talk to the three of them. You're going to discover that for virtually the entire 20th century, on social justice issues, the Roman Catholic Church and the Democratic Party in the United States were, in at least 9 out of 10 issues, on the same page. Now we're going to find out in a few minutes how they got off that page. But first, we need to find out, how did they get on the same page? Michael, Sean, what were the Democrats and the Catholics doing in the 20s and 30s in America?
I think, you know, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's great to be here. Catholics, when they came to America, they came as a poor immigrant community. And I think that's critical to understanding that their experience led to their political involvement. And that initial political involvement, of course, was at the local level. Who was going to help them get their citizenship, find housing, get a job, and these sorts of things. And so you had this group. Republicans were much more the establishment party, and they didn't really, for a variety of reasons, did not, to the degree there was anti-immigrant fervor, it was on the Republican Party. Democrats welcomed these newcomers because it would help them create the blocks of vote that would allow them to control the politics at the local level. At the national level, the Democratic Party in the first part of the 20th century had little to say to Catholics. William Jennings Bryan was an agrarian populist. This was not the milieu from which Catholics came. And it's only really with first of all, the nomination of Al Smith in 1928 and then Franklin Roosevelt in 1932 that Catholics start shifting to the Democratic Party in overwhelming numbers. Part of that was an extension of their view of their own interests, which was that Franklin Roosevelt, you know, spoke to those who were the have-nots and promised to help them. Part of that was this ideological coherence between the two, starting from very different premises. Roosevelt and part of his non-Catholic brain trust devised and proposed a set of proposals that we now know as the New Deal. Within Catholic intellectual circles, starting from a different set of premises, and led largely by a professor here in Washington at Catholic University, Monsignor John A. Ryan, at that point, Father John A. Ryan, reached very similar conclusions. Ryan writes in 1915, he issues a book, Distributive Justice, about how in Thomistic theory you can understand how goods should be allocated, and starts advocating for positions like old age insurance, what we would know as Social Security. In the 1920s, he becomes a real card-carrying member of the liberal elite in Washington. He has Thanksgiving dinner with Justice and Mrs. Brandeis. He's on the First Council for Christians and Jews. He is active in early racial justice issues. So at the time of 1932 and the Roosevelt victory, he develops a friendship with Francis Perkins, who, if you want to know how far we've shifted, very few people in America, I think, can even tell you who the current Secretary of Labor is. And Francis Perkins was perhaps the most dynamic member of Roosevelt's cabinet. I mean, the Department of Labor was really seminal in most of the New Deal policies, including Social Security, even though that was outside of her ken. Before she agreed to take the job, she met with Roosevelt, and Roosevelt said, look, I'm with you on this. Social Security, the country's not ready for it. Franklin Roosevelt, before polling, had a great ability to sense the pulse of the American people. And he said, so please go out and educate first the administration and then the country on this. And this is what she did. She and Ryan became very, very good friends. In 1933, when he is made a Monsignor, she is the principal speaker at the banquet in his honor that night. So it becomes just a part of being a Catholic is you're going to vote for Roosevelt, and Catholics become a constitutive part of the New Deal, and between the 32 and 36 election, Roosevelt's share of the Catholic vote actually increases. As best, again, no polling at that time, but as best as we can tell, in largely Catholic precincts, he increases his margin, and that would continue on until the 1970s.
Great, thank you. There will come a time in the second of the four administrations of Franklin Delano Roosevelt when FDR himself will refer to Monsignor Ryan as Right Reverend New Dealer. What was John Ryan doing?
Ryan was doing several things, and I think what was most shocking to me when I did the research for this was to come across a 1936 radio broadcast that Monsignor Ryan did 2 weeks before the election. That was paid for by the Democratic National Committee and was a nationally broadcast endorsement of Franklin Roosevelt for re-election. This is shocking to us, and I would submit, I think we've come to a conclusion that we would not in our own day want priests or prelates going out and endorsing candidates by name unless I get to choose the priests. Then I would be fine with it. But he goes on and he gives a half-hour radio address, I believe it was on NBC, endorsing Roosevelt's re-election. It was partly in response to another very prominent, and perhaps the most prominent Catholic figure of the 1930s, which was Father Charles Coughlin, who was a vigorous anti-Semite, had originally been a fan of Roosevelt, had said Roosevelt or ruin in 1932. But Roosevelt understood he was a live wire and kept him at a distance. He turns on Roosevelt and accuses him of being a communist and of his administration of being a communist. And so I think there was a perception that you have one priest attacking, you need another priest to defend. But in both instances, it's very curious that where we, when I was born in 1962, I grew up thinking, religion is here and politics is there. And certainly this was a level of and a type of political involvement that I found quite stunning. But it was not limited to Ryan, although Ryan did serve on several boards of the administration. When there was a longshoreman strike in California, in San Francisco, Roosevelt turns to the Archbishop of San Francisco to lead the negotiations out of it. Monsignor Haas, who would go on to become a bishop, who had originally been a student of Ryan's, is on the National Labor Relations Board. You have the start of the career of Monsignor George Higgins, who became the great labor priest of the 20th century. And their work was not just serendipity, it was rooted very much in the emerging social teaching of the Catholic Church. In 1891, Pope Leo XIII issues Rerum Novarum, the first papal encyclical on labor issues and industrial democracy and these issues. 40 years later, Pope Pius XI issues Quadragesimo Anno to commemorate that event. And you have an emerging teaching of Catholic social thought that lines up much more coherently with the Democratic Party's view of social relations than with the laissez-faire economics of the Republican Party and Hooverism. And so that, again, it was not just a matter of interest. There was an ideological coherence.
Great. As the lawyers in the audience would say, we're laying a foundation for how the party and the church found themselves to be so often, so much on the same page. Right. And we can fast forward this process now all the way to September of 1960, when the Catholic candidate from Massachusetts, the junior senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy, gives a very famous speech in Houston. What's that all about?
Kennedy is the second Catholic to run for president. Al Smith, the first in 1928. And it makes for interesting reading to go back to the election commentaries in Catholic publications like Commonweal immediately before Al Smith's defeat. They did not see it coming. They really thought in this great day and age, surely there was no longer anti-Catholic bigotry. He got trounced. It was a landslide against him. And they had not anticipated that. Even though he had been 4 times elected the governor of New York State, he loses New York in the 1928 presidential election. Kennedy's staff was haunted by this. So in an effort to diffuse it, he goes to the Houston Ministerial Convention, a Baptist convention, and he gives a very famous speech that was worked on by Sorensen and his real brain trust, and consulting with certain Catholics. I criticized this speech very heavily because of some of his construction there, and he said, my religion is private and should matter only to me. If he had used the word personal, I think we would have avoided some of the misunderstandings that follow about the role of religion and politics. Any religion must be personally held, or you're just, you know, obedient to some outside authority. But at least Catholicism was in 1960 and always is completely not private. It is a public faith. The worship of the church is communal. It has a very visible hierarchy. And it is rooted in a set of historical public claims about events that happened on a hillside in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago that you either believe or you don't. So this, to say that religion is private is, I would argue, nonsensical. And unfortunately, although it helped him with the audience of Baptists, and it is a shocking speech to go back and realize, you know, what he was saying is, my religion will not affect me in office. My religion is what I do on Sunday morning. And a group of ministers found this comforting. And, you know, you would hope that they thought the influence of their Sunday sermons would extend through the week. But such was the nature of anti-Catholic bigotry that they felt he had to do this, his advisors, and it was warmly received. Kennedy goes on to win, albeit narrowly, and his advisors believed that the only reason the election was even close was the persistence of anti-Catholic prejudice. It is the nature of prejudice, I think, that once he's in, the bugaboo about having a Catholic in public office disappears instantly. It turns out he was not taking orders from the Vatican. There was no dual loyalty. And so the next time a Catholic runs, John Kerry in 2004, none of that comes up. None of the issues Kennedy faced about dual loyalty. In fact, just the opposite. He will be charged with not being Catholic enough, which is a very, you know, how much things can change in a mere 44 years. But again, I think the problem with Kennedy's speech is it was not theologically sound and set the Democratic Party on a course and gave it a language that it would come to resent as events in the 60s played out.
It's a very cogent answer, and certainly today one of the great problems in America and many of the Western democracies is this notion that faith is purely private. Your mom likes chocolate ice cream, I like vanilla, we each have our choices, we leave it there. Unfortunately, faith cannot be reduced to the status of which type of ice cream do you prefer. And this has left the Democratic Party in a particularly great quandary as of the 22nd of January, 1973, Roe v. Wade.
Roe v. Wade embraces a juridical notion of privacy, which is in the American constitutional system. Privacy is derived, they say, from the penumbra, from the emanations of the other constitutional rights. But it's essentially what we know as the expression, a man's home is his castle. That once you're in your house or in your family, the government cannot intrude into your decision making. The problem is that legal notion of privacy gets carried over to our general approach. And so you have people say things like, in the wake of Roe v. Wade, you have people say, well, I can't legislate my morality. That's my personal religion. And you still hear this in certain Democratic liberal circles. This is just my, you know, personal, private religious beliefs. I can't legislate morality. I would submit the civil rights movement was a very explicit legislation of morality, of one sector of the nation and one view of the rights of citizens against a different set of rights and views of the morality of that situation. All laws, to a certain degree, are embodying a certain morality, and our legislators and our jurists can speak to that. You also, because of the nature of the issue, which is pregnancy, got and that it emerges out of a feminist movement to claim their rights. You also get this claims for privileged hermeneutics, which is, what business is it yours to say you're a man? You shouldn't tell me whether or not I can have an abortion. Well, I'm not a burglar, and I've never been burgled, but I have an opinion on burglary, and I want it to be against the law, and I want my legislator to have an opinion on burglary also. So, you know, one of the premises of democracy is there's no privileged hermeneutics. You have to make your arguments. But the Democrats, focusing on this notion of privacy, and really, especially Catholic Democrats, not wanting to have the conversation at all, And hearkening back to the days where being a Catholic Democrat meant that you were in favor of the New Deal, not wanting to deal with, gay marriage and abortion rights and all these much more divisive issues. They hide behind this privacy notion. And the problem with it is they used it to end a conversation that, of course, the American people were still having. And it short-circuited their ability to speak in moral terms. If you believe you can't legislate morality, then you stop advocating for health insurance or an end to the war in Vietnam in moral language. And that is the only language that can persuade a country of churchgoers. I mean, America, almost unique in the Western democracies, remains a nation of churchgoers. And so if you are tone deaf to the moral language that is used every Sunday by a majority of your people, pretty soon you're going to start losing elections. And the Democrats, to their chagrin, start losing elections, and specifically with Catholic votes. In 1980, you have the emergence of so-called Reagan Democrats. Okay, these are Macomb County, Michigan, suburban Detroit districts that flip from longtime Democrat to Ronald Reagan. They're overwhelmingly Catholic. What Reagan Democrats could also be called Reagan Catholic Democrats. And since 1980, Catholics have become the swing vote in every American election. If you want to know who's going to win, know how the Catholics are going to vote.
That's very, very concise. We know that three things were occurring during that period. On the one hand, there was the Vietnam War, and it bitterly divided the Roman Catholic Church in America. On the other hand, there were the race riots, and again, Catholics were bitterly divided as to how to respond to the sequel to the Civil Rights Movement. While those two things were going forward, the people themselves moved. They moved from the inner city to the suburbs and the exurbs, so that the Roman Catholic vote that we all knew in 1936, Grandpa or Great-Grandpa in Brooklyn or Milwaukee knew that on Sunday morning what he heard on the altar was also what he heard on Monday from FDR. He had no problem figuring out where he was going to vote. This is no longer the case by 1975, 1980, because certainly what you're hearing on the altar on Sunday morning is not what you're hearing on Monday, particularly when there is no longer a moral dimension to the appeals the Democrats are putting out. Part of the appeal is strictly the language of lawyers. It is the language of rights. Part of the language is also what Michael Shawn has very properly called privileged hermeneutics. Women can say, get your rosaries off my ovaries. I'm a woman and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. You're a man, you have no right to speak. When I took high school biology, I had the impression, of course, that there were two people involved in parenthood, but this apparently got missed in the arguments that were being put forward. So as a consequence, first the Democrats lose their moral voice, and then secondly they come to be seen as the party that is an aggregate of special interests. The women have their thing, the teachers' union has their thing, and so forth and so on. This is the way that the Dems, in short, kneecapped themselves. If we put that on fast forward, then we'll move right through, if we may, the Clinton era, where there was a holding action, to what was happening with the accession of George W. Bush to the White House in 2000, and then his winning of the election in 2004.
George Bush, very early on, recognized the importance of the Catholic vote. And in running for, to give you an idea of how sophisticated I think their operation was, in 2000, he goes to Greenville, South Carolina, and gets the endorsement of the president of Bob Jones University, who was famous for calling the Roman Catholic Church the whore of Babylon and this sort of thing. This, of course, does not sit well with Catholics. On the same visit, an arrangement is made that Bush will privately call on the Roman Catholic Bishop of Charleston, South Carolina, to soothe all feathers. This kind of thing does not happen in the Democratic Party. I don't even, first of all, I don't think they would know who to call. And it doesn't occur to them that you're still seeing this today in the rollout of embryonic stem cell research and some other things. They're tone deaf still to Catholic concerns, and could, I think, do a much better job simply at the level of communication. Bush then comes in, and here Bush, and in this degree, I think Republicans, we have to remember, Catholics break down like the rest of the country. Some are more conservative, some are more liberal, but what Bush is very good at is echoing the religious tropes. When you go back to his 2004 acceptance speech at the Republican nomination in New York. The first 5, 6 paragraphs all begin, "I believe this, I believe this. The city of New York in the wake of 9/11 is not brought back, it is resurrected." You know, the language throughout, it's very, very religiously laden. His speechwriters, Michael Gerson, who you can read his writings in the Post now, very, very good at using the religious idiom to explain what he's doing. But they also very aggressively started targeting what we now call social networks of Roman Catholics, and especially Latinos. And Bush and Rove, to their credit, understand the Latinos are the wave of the future, and Bush increases his share of the Latino vote over Dole in '96, and then increases it again in 2004. Democrats are asleep at the wheel, I think, in both in 2000 and in the 2004 election at how to reach out to Catholics.
Very fair. We've laid the foundation, as lawyers like to say, for what happened over the course of the 20th century and brought us into the 21st in a very quick, almost blink-and-you-missed-it fashion. Now, as we move into a much shorter segment, which will be the concluding set of questions up here, I'd like to apply some of what we've just heard to what's happening today and where we might go from here. What would be the recommendations? And to do so, I'm going to take just a couple sentences here and there from the book and read one sentence here, one sentence there, and ask Michael Shawn to comment on them. The first sentence actually comes from page 210 in the book. A very provocative, very short sentence. Michael Shawn says, "Democrats must rediscover their soul if they are to win elections again." We'll couple that with this comment here, right near the close of the book on page 219. Michael Shawn is recommending how Democrats might rediscover their soul. "It is here that Democrats can find the secrets of electoral success that Franklin Roosevelt and Monsignor John Ryan discerned in crafting the New Deal, traditional American liberalism married to Catholic social teachings, creating policies that are morally upright and politically successful." Michael Shawn?
Again, I think we saw this in the last election. I think Barack Obama did a much better job articulating views that were consonant with Catholic social thought. He used the phrase, the dignity of work, again and again and again. And this is a phrase that, again, has its source in Leo XIII's 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum, and is a phrase that throughout John Paul's writings and sermons on these issues is used again and again. I think they also received this great gift. Traditional liberalism, as defined, and I think it's the best definition ever, is at the very first page of the last chapter of Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s The Age of Jackson. And he said, we Americans have come to understand that the competition for control of government is itself a guarantee of our liberties, but that usually the moneyed interest is the most powerful in that conquest, and that the role of liberalism traditionally is to give voice to other important social actors and to achieve those goods, those social goods, that the moneyed interest has ignored or defeated. And now, Barack Obama benefited from the fact that laissez-faire economics, alas, does not look quite so good these days as it did even a year ago, and that was becoming apparent as we went into the election. But if you look at some of his key speeches, there was a speech in St. Louis about 10 days out, 2 weeks out, that really could have been written by John A. Ryan. That it, again, the dignity of work, but also just this idea that the question is what we value. That are we going to have a system where we are worshiping the laws of the market, or are we going to try to inflesh these other social goods and values that we have that are richer and deeper, and I would argue more religious, into our social fabric? I think, why is he still doing so well in the polls? Because I think in this economic crisis, people feel powerless when you tell them that these impersonal laws of the market are all you can do. With that Alan Greenspan view of the world, well, you can't argue with the market. Well, we want somebody to tell us we're not powerless. And so I don't think most people like myself are not economists. I don't know if what the president is doing is going to work. I don't think the president knows, but he's doing something. And that's what people need to feel again. And I think that he's touching that very basic notion that is at the central of Catholic teaching, which is these human laws have to cohere with human values. There are no laws of the market that should be the object of our worship. And that there's an idolatry that has been going on in the laissez-faire world since Reaganomics was born. And then in the last 8 years where Bush kind of put the lazy into laissez-faire and everyone was asleep at the wheel. The Department of Labor was asleep at the wheel. The SEC was asleep at the wheel. But they were asleep at the wheel for a reason, which was A, they had a view that government, almost a Calvinistic view, that government as a human institution was something to be distrusted. And secondly, this view that, again, the laws of the market could not be argued with. Those are profoundly non-Catholic issues. One thing I'll add in there, though, to show you how, getting these terms right, they can be so confusing and why you really do have to read the book. In Vatican contemporary writing on these issues, what we would call conservative economics, they call neoliberal economics. Their phrase for laissez-faire is neoliberal economics. And that shows you they see laissez-faire economics coming out of the Enlightenment worldview. I mean, again, Adam Smith is part of the Scottish Enlightenment. And they say we've been hostile to that all along. So there are some ways that a contemporary American liberal like the president can agree with the Catholic worldview, and other ways where I think he's got to take a step back a little bit and say, alas, I don't think he views the Enlightenment as a seraglio. And I think there is still an attitude in Catholic social thought that it was.
We have 3 very quick closing questions because we want to know, what is it that theology brings to the forum? Why are the Catholics at this? Then we want to know, what is it that they should converge on next, and then our closing question. So the first of those 3 questions, what is it that theology brings to the forum? What can it add to politics that's not just chocolate versus vanilla ice cream? Michael Shawn suggests the following. This is from page 51, very early in the book. Theology goes deeper than mere ethics. It involves fundamental beliefs about the human person, what used to be called philosophic anthropology, and any arbitrary walling off of parts of human activity from those fundamental beliefs is bound to end in ruin. Michael Shawn?
The most obvious example of this, we were discussing it earlier, is the reduction of religion to ethics. It turns out that there are a variety of ways the human race could have come to its belief in the common brotherhood of man. But the way it did get there was in a dogmatic belief in the common fatherhood of God. As a Catholic, our ethical beliefs are rooted in our beliefs, our dogmatic beliefs about who God is and who we are as creatures, as He as a creator and us as creatures, not the other way around. And I think once you say, well, you can come into the public square, but you've got to leave your dogmas at the door, you misunderstand what exactly who a believer is and what they bring into that. You can't leave it. Now, I don't think any of us want to go back to the confessional state where you have a Catholic state. How do you draw those lines? You draw those lines because that's political activity. That's what you do when you get into politics. But the person who is doing the drawing the lines is a believer and owes no one an apology for bringing his or her religious beliefs into that. The caveat, I would say, is it has to be reasonable. And this is, I think, one of the great things in the 2008 election. There were 2 instances. Reverend John Hagee, a conservative evangelical, and Reverend Jeremiah Wright, a liberation preacher in Chicago, were both thrown under the bus because they said things that were unreasonable. Heretofore, if you were in the pulpit or behind a collar, you were immune from that kind of criticism. And I think it was a very healthy thing for our democracy that in 2008, one on the left and one on the right both got thrown under the bus and told, look, just because you're in a pulpit doesn't mean you can get away with saying things that are unreasonable. This is a very healthy development. In my tradition, in the Catholic tradition also, you have a clear theme from the very beginning of his pontificate in Pope Benedict's teachings. Faith and reason go together. They must go together. We just had in Rome a great symposium at the Gregorian University on evolution. And some of the intelligent design advocates in America wanted to be included in the speakers panel. And the Pontifical Academy of Sciences said no. This is, what you're teaching, you may believe it, but A, the church doesn't teach it, and secondly, science doesn't teach it, and this is a Catholic scientific enterprise. And so they were very upset that they were left out. There are, a clear, I think that's one of the emerging cleavages, by the way, between Catholics and evangelicals, is on just that issue of intelligent design. But you do have to be reasonable. And if you're not, whether you're a priest or not, whether you're a minister or not, you get thrown under the bus in American politics.
So we've heard that regardless of whether we're a Sunni Turkish Muslim or an Irish Roman Catholic, theology is a part of what we are. We bring all of ourselves to the public forum. We don't leave the best part of ourselves languishing at home. When we get to the forum, what are we aiming for when we bring all of ourselves to the forum? This is what Michael Shawn suggests. It's probably one of the most marvelous sentences in the entire book. It's on page 201. A true consideration of the common good will define it not only in terms of economic well-being, but also in terms of justice, the protection of basic freedoms, and the nation's moral and cultural fiber. In other words, theology, which speaks to the full person, speaks in the forum to the full human condition.
One of the great mistaken notions of contemporary political theory is people vote because of this issue, not that issue, as if a voter is incapable of multitasking. And I think you're seeing this play out with the administration. I think most Catholics, like most Americans, want the president's economic proposals to succeed in bringing the economy back. But that doesn't mean we stop caring about pro-life issues. It doesn't mean that we're still that we've become unconcerned about Iraq. For discrete groups of the electorate, those issues and their relative importance changes. There are certain, and especially these issues, there are threshold issues for Catholics. If you are just so rigorously pro-choice and dismissive of Catholic moral concerns about the abortion issue, they're not even going to listen to what you have to say about the economy. Okay, this is how I think how it works, and I do think political leadership requires, and one of the things I most admire about the president is he's hitting on all cylinders, but in his speeches, in the same way, another example, how many times have you heard, well, the 2008 election, what happened was the moral issues got pushed aside and it was all about the economy. I would submit Barack Obama succeeded in part because he saw the economy as a moral issue. The most fundamental obligation you have as a parent or a spouse is to provide for your family. That's a moral issue. And if you can't do that, you really start getting angry, and people are getting really angry. So they're all tied up there. But I think, there was too long that the Democrats, and back to this quote, really just felt that the social fabric of the nation would take care of itself and had a kind of libertarian view about those issues. And libertarianism is not real popular in America. You hear, oh, out west, the rugged individualism. You take away their water projects. You shut down the Hoover Dam and see how much those people in Las Vegas and Los Angeles like government intervention. Of course they rely on it. And there are no rugged individuals anymore. And thank God. And the Catholic Church has never celebrated rugged individualism. That's not one of our values. So
we've heard quite a number of provocative suggestions, albeit diplomatically phrased, from Michael Shawn today. I'm going to close my section here with one more quote that, again, sounds very diplomatic. But when you listen closely, you realize that Michael Shawn is suggesting that Roman Catholics in America are less close to evangelicals in the South than they are to Sunni Muslims in Turkey. Here's the quote. But on issues such as economics and foreign policy, which involved the entire society, Catholics were more likely to recognize morality's public and communal nature. In other words, we're all in this boat together. It's not the rugged individual. It's the fact that if we don't all pull together, we shall certainly fall apart.
Right. And I think, and that's reflected in Catholic forms of worship, you know, versus in evangelical, it's about you and your Bible. You may go to church on Sunday. If you do go to communion in most evangelical church, it's brought to you and passed around, and you take yours and pass it along. You don't go up to a common altar and receive from a common cup. So this is at that level of symbolism and beyond symbolism, deeper than symbolism, where that Catholics get their most basic identity. I think we were talking beforehand about identity, and there's a great essay I commend to you by Leon Wieseltier, where he writes, "I hear it said of a man that he leads a double life, and I think to myself, just two." You know, the president of the United States 2 days ago in Turkey said, you know, I am here to celebrate this secular Muslim state. And I said, what can he possibly mean? You know, we know what he intends. What he intends is, it turns out, the identity of a nation, like an identity of an individual, is not a unitary identity. We have multiple identities. To be a father is not to be a good spouse. To know that a man is a crook at work, it tells you nothing about what kind of father he is, necessarily. We have these multiple identities. The claim of religion is that it has to be foundational, and it is the only part of your life, the only thing in your life that makes claims on the entirety of your life. Politics does not. Economics does not. Even fatherhood does not. But that your faith makes claims on the entirety of the life. The idea that the Democrats had that it could be left at the door was misguided from the get-go at that point. How it plays out, how you tailor it, that's the work of us. That's our work. That's politicians. We got to figure that out. You will get muddy. It is not a place for those who are averse to compromise. It is not a place for those who are doctrinaire in the negative sense, but it is a place for those who are dogmatic in the fullest sense, which is they're not afraid to say that what I believe about God and what I believe about myself is going to have an import when I look at these human institutions, such as our economy and our political life together.
After those awesomely provocative suggestions, I think it's time for some equally provocative questions from the audience. Who'd like to start? Ma'am?
Thank you so much. My name is Tonay Kamber. I'm a Fulbright scholar from Turkey. I'd like to ask you about the generalization you made in the middle of your speech, that we should look at the Catholic votes if you want to know who is going to win in the next elections. But you then also alluded to the heterogeneity of the Catholic voters in the United States. But your first statement kind of implies that Catholic voters could be also single issue voters and could, you know, vote a party on certain issues. So how should I coin these two statements together? Thank you.
Let's take the spectrum of the Catholic vote. On the left, you have people like myself. My mother told me if I ever voted for a Republican, my right hand would wither and fall to the ground. Never have. I don't argue with my mother. May she rest in peace. On the right, you have people for whom, if someone says that they're pro-choice, that's the end of the discussion. There's no more that they need to hear. In the center, Catholics are the swing vote. And it turns out, because of where they're located, in Ohio, Pennsylvania, they're key swing states, and now increasingly in the emerging swing states of the Southwest, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, 3 states that went for Bush and flipped for Obama this time. It's the Latinos. Florida. Okay, you've got, you know, what was the vote in Florida that flipped? Was the Puerto Rican vote on the I-4 corridor. Okay, they're overwhelmingly Catholic, but a very cultural Catholicism. It's not, you know, necessarily that they read the catechism every day. So the point is that you've always, and be clear, there were Catholics who voted against Franklin Roosevelt. There's always been a core that are here and a core there. But the center, the people that are up for grabs in an election, are not only disproportionately Catholic, but I would argue that they have there are certain ways of speaking to them and ways that they view the world that can help you win an election. But part of it is just outreach. People like to be listened to. I think the Bush administration did a great job on that. But I think Obama has captured the voice much better than any politician in my lifetime. Does that answer your question?
Who's up next? The gentleman in the green shirt.
I'm Vicente Garcia. I'm a consultant here in DC. I believe it was yesterday or earlier today, Tony Blair brought up the issue of that the Catholic populace is becoming more liberal, I guess especially in regards to social issues. Do you agree with that? And if so, would that affect the level of how much of a swing vote the Catholic populace is actually making, or will be in the future in U.S. politics?
Was he speaking about England or America? Do we know?
The world.
Okay. First of all, always be suspicious of converts. I know that's an awful thing to say just before we receive a bunch of them at Easter. But be suspicious of converts when they're speaking about the church. No. I think, to a degree, and not knowing what issues he was speaking about, again, I think Catholics generally have ranged on the left in terms of economic issues, and those are at the fore right now, obviously. On social issues such as gay marriage, most of the polling I've seen suggests that Catholics are right where the rest of the country is, or a little bit more liberal than the others. I think it's more about, but you really have to be precise about the issue, how it's framed. I'm very suspicious of these polls that say, "Oh, Catholics are becoming more liberal." I want to know how it was asked. Is this a Catholic who self-identifies as a Catholic? Were they asked how often they go to church? There are all these calibrations there. What I don't accept is certain conservatives say, "Oh, if you believe that, then you're a bad Catholic." At the very least, that's an assertion, and you need an argument. Okay. I think, and there are gradations. I think, I was listening on the way down here to a segment on gay marriage. I think Catholics are in favor of traditional marriage. First of all, Catholics aren't afraid of tradition as a word. It's not an epithet that we throw. But I do think, and I think the polling bears this out, they are very revolted at the idea that people are denied their rights. And I think you see some of the most creative solutions to this thorny issue coming out of the Catholic Church. You had a situation in 1996 in San Francisco where the city council voted to extend same-sex partner benefits. And if you contracted with the city, you had to extend those benefits. The Catholic Church said, we can't do that. And the Catholic Church in most cities, was the largest conveyor of social benefits. So this was going to be hugely disruptive. So the Archbishop sat down with the mayor and they worked out a compromise, which was you could give your benefits to anyone who was legally domiciled with you. Could be the same-sex partner, could be an unemployed cousin, could be a retired aunt, anyone who was there who was not your spouse but was legally domiciled. That way the church is blessing what? The church is blessing the extension of benefits. No particular arrangement. But those who were advocating for the same-sex partner benefits were getting the material benefit. Okay? This is casuistry at its best. Is taking a very complicated situation and applying the law in a very creative way. This was just done in Puerto Rico 2 years ago. The same model. There they were revising the civil law, so it wasn't about contracting for social services. It was every citizen in Puerto Rico. They have a civil law tradition, not a common law tradition, and is now, based on the Puerto Rico model, being extended throughout Latin America. So curiously, as opposed to the kind of frontal approach of the gay marriage advocates in this state, it is likely that gay couples in Uruguay will get benefits before gay couples in Arkansas. So, there's, I think that's a very creative way of going forward that makes sure people get the benefits, but also recognizes marriage has meant this for thousands of years. And marriage means this, not that. In the same way, this is a book and this is a cup. And that these words have meaning. I don't like the idea of a government coming in and changing the meaning of words. Forget about the actual issue of gay marriage. I mean, you are making a change there. And I think that's really something we liberals should be careful about rushing on to that. I mean, this was, one of the scary parts about Orwell's 1984 was government's ability to change the meaning of words. That's a liberal concern. So.
Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cynthia, and I'm an attorney and a random blogger. I'm really curious about your opinion of whether you think that there is an inappropriate intervention in in the hierarchy of the church, in the political life in America. For example, I know just before the 2004 election, then Ratzinger wrote a big Wall Street Journal article that was quite controversial, in which he basically said that, you know, you're conspiring with evil if you vote for a politician such as John Kerry, who had somebody on his staff who was part of Emily's List or something that evil. And it continues. It continues in the debate about whether Nancy Pelosi should be able to receive communion or whether she should be held before a bishop first, or, you know. So do you think that there is any limit of what might be appropriate or inappropriate intervention from a political oversight perspective?
Well, first of all, I think there's a limit from an ecclesiastical perspective. I would quibble with the definition of Ratzinger writing a piece in the Wall Street Journal. As I understand, that was a document that was leaked, part of which was leaked, not the entire thing, and it was a private communication between Cardinal Ratzinger and Cardinal McCarrick, and what it really was not, in fact, a systematic treatment of the subject, but a series of talking points that were drawn up for the Cardinal to facilitate his discussions with the American bishops on their ad limina on a subject they brought up. So I don't want to put this on Benedict. I think he's actually been quite good on most of these issues. You know, when the Holy Father, Pope John Paul II, you know, insisted priests and bishops not be involved in politics and required Father Drinan to resign from Congress, also required that, I've forgotten his name, but there was a member of the cabinet in the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, and he had to resign. So I think, you know, the church has begun to set those limits. I think the bishops have to be careful. You know, they have First Amendment rights, as do we all. But they have to be, you know, you never, if you are in a position of authority like that, you can never speak as a citizen, okay? And I would argue to these bishops that get a little over-involved and say, well, I'm only speaking as a private citizen. I want to say, well, last time I checked, we believe your ordination meant you were ontologically changed. so, you know, you can't just leave that at the door and go into this fray. There are people who look to you with reverence, and they may not understand the distinctions that you are familiar with when you speak. So I think they are well advised to be more quiet on candidates and around election time. That said, it is obviously a part of their ministry to speak out on issues. You know, was I proud of Cardinal O'Boyle, the Archbishop of the city, when he stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963 with the Reverend Martin Luther King? You bet I am. You know, when he desegregated the schools in this city before Brown v. Board of Education, I'm very proud of him. When Archbishop Brummel did the same in New Orleans and excommunicated Catholic public officials who were fighting to keep the schools segregated in Louisiana, I'm proud of that. What I'm not proud of is liberal theologians at Boston College 2 years ago denouncing the offering of an honorary degree to Condoleezza Rice because the Bush administration was so out of touch with Catholic values, and then not having the courage to stand up in this situation with President Obama going to Notre Dame and saying, we were wrong. I mean, if the Secretary of State is not welcome on a campus, then it's debatable whether the President of the United States is welcome on a Catholic campus. So I think that's, you know, there has to be some consistency on the part of Catholic institutions on these issues. I think some bishops have gone too far. You know, I think we know who they are. I think they're a small minority, and I think the number one problem, and there is no answer to it. Is you have a few very loud bishops in America who are very conservative, who speak out on issues of national importance, and most of the bishops who don't agree with them also believe that it is not their place to speak out on national issues. So on this Notre Dame controversy, I suspect most bishops do not share the opinion of some of the bishops who've spoken out against it. But they also say, I'm not the Bishop of South Bend. It's not my place to talk on this at all. And there's no way around that. That's you know, something that in God's own time will get worked out. Does that answer your question? I don't think there's a hard and fast line that can be drawn. I think, you know, it's not hard to believe that there are issues where you wish the clergy would be at the forefront. Obviously, I think we can look with a great deal of sadness, for instance, at the response of the Catholic clergy in France to the Holocaust and the deportation of the Jews from that country. The German clergy in the face of the rise of Nazism. I wish they had been more outspoken. I don't think there's a lot of issues in American public life that rise to that level.
Sir.
Coming from a Jewish background, it's
1 second, sir. We have
We're
a
gonna get you the
microphone
mic.
coming.
You want to pass me a microphone? Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, coming. Okay, I should stand. Coming from a Jewish background, it's a little alien that someone should be an arbiter of our conscience other than ourselves. People can suggest conscience. The way I see the church, I can't say that the whole church is like this, all of the people, but I would say the hierarchy views itself as the arbiter of conscience and views the dogmatism as an arbiter or a final arbiter of conscience, which is a very powerful intoxicant in a way. And I would think in America at its best, where secularism isn't necessarily anti-religions, but creates a forum for people to seek their own conscience, to have a very powerful force that dictates conscience rather than the process of conscience, that dictates the behavior that should be taken based on a stance rather than supporting an honest examination of self. And again, going back to the Holocaust, I don't know that the church has that authority to do that in the face of all the deaths, coming from a Jewish background. No offense to you as a Catholic. But, and I'm kind of losing my question, but where is that line drawn between a church using authority and an individual finding the authority of conscience within themselves? What about a church that does not permit the individual to have that struggle beyond a certain point?
I don't think the hierarchy views itself as an arbiter of conscience. Obviously, it is part of the mission of the hierarchy to teach the gospel. And if you're a Christian, you accept this data of revelation as authoritative. Okay, if Jesus Christ is the Son of God and he taught X, Y, and Z are no longer negotiable. Now, how we apply X, Y, and Z is a very human issue. So,
Extrapolated into our present time.
Right, and I don't think, but I also want to be clear here, I don't think you can just say, this was the Cuomo solution in the 1984 speech at Notre Dame. You all set out the principles, but we have to do the tailoring, we politicians, and so the clergy has nothing to say about that. Prudence is a virtue. Mm-hmm. And so just saying, well, we have to make prudential judgments doesn't mean you're free to make immoral judgments. Again, to cite the former Archbishop of this city in the middle of the Civil Rights struggle, mm-hmm. Cardinal Boyle went and publicly called for the Senate to vote on cloture on the Civil Rights Bill. Now, that's a pretty prudential, precise level to a parliamentary vote that I think had a moral content. To vote against the invocation of cloture there was immoral. Okay, but there is this application. And the bishops in their teaching recognize the closer you get to the level of application, the less authoritative their views can be. At the level of principle, to murder is wrong. There's no debate with that. How you apply that is abortion murder. Actually, in Catholic canon law, there's a distinction between abortion and murder. Mm-hmm. So now, does that mean that we've ever said abortion is fine? No, we've never viewed that. So it's complicated, but I don't think arbiter is the right word. I think it's their job to teach and to form the conscience. And yes, it's also it's legitimate to throw a flag every once in a while and say, actually, that's not what the Catholic Church believes.
Right.
That's truth in advertising. You can't, there is a concern there that I can't get up as a Democrat and say, the Democratic Party is horrible. Well, then why am I a Democrat? I mean, so I think again, it's gray.
We won't have time here, alas, for a great debate as to what is a proper interpretation of the extent of individual formation of conscience in the Catholic Church. But we can do two things in very rapid sequence. First, we can give an example of a Catholic lawyer speaking well within his rights last fall on the campaign trail. Michael Shawn knows this story very well. And then we can close with a line from Michael Shawn that I believe everyone, be they Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, would say a very pious amen to. First, the very, very quick story. It so happens that last fall, everyone knowing that there were 9 states that were swing states, and that in all 9 states the swing vote was precisely the Roman Catholic vote. I was on the campaign trail in these states and debating issues of strategy as the former Commissioner of the Navy and Marine Corps, debating issues of law, particularly because we have stood for the rule of law for over 200 years, and debating issues of theology. It so happened that in Denver, live on Denver's radio, I was supposed to do only military strategy. But the radio announcer said, and this comes right to your point, it goes to the heart of the matter. He said, well, we're here in Denver, and Colorado's a flyover state, and people from the 2 coasts always ignore us. But you know, we have a really outspoken archbishop. Did you know that? And I said, yes, I know that. He said, do you know, last night, so you can date this very precisely, he gave a speech. And he said, no one in good conscience can vote, if they are a Catholic, for Obama. Now, I read your bio. You're a Catholic. I mean, it's not part of our topic, but how can you defy your own archbishop? We have authority in the church. I'm not Catholic myself, but we have authority. You can't do that. Now, if you're Irish, of course, you've got 2 options when you hear a palpable falsehood. You can, on the one hand, explode, marvelous Irish temper. On the other hand, you can use a sense of humor. So I counted to 3, decided to go for the latter option. And I said, I'm a bit confused. Which archbishop are you talking about? Are you talking about the archbishop who signed faithful citizenship, which identified 14 issues, which all Roman Catholics must take on board, which are all of them intrinsic evils, and several of which include the taking of human life, innocent life? And faithful citizenship, signed off by over 200 bishops, says no Roman Catholic is permitted to say there is only one issue. A well-formed conscience, faith and reason, the great gift of the Catholic Church, is one that balances the issues and says, this is where I come out. As a good Roman Catholic, the primacy of conscience is first. But I'm confused. Are you talking about the Archbishop who signed that? Or are you talking about the Archbishop last night in his speech who tore that document to shreds? Which one are we talking about? And the radio announcer burst out laughing, because what was the Archbishop of Denver going to say? His own actions had contradicted his own words. And a Catholic is well within his rights as a layman to say, Archbishop, by your own terms, you have stopped yourself. You make no sense. What you have done is betrayed your own signature. That is very much in keeping with the Roman Catholic tradition, as a tradition my family has held to for 1,700 years. Particularly in Ireland, where we are so proud that we have never, ever seen a discrimination against Jewish folks. The notion is that Catholics can step up to the bat, and they can do very good things and exercise their conscience. This primacy of conscience, though, has to be exercised in a certain context, and this is the context of Michael Shawn. This is the context under which we close, the context in which I believe in the postmodern world Muslims, Jews, and Christians converge. This is what Michael Shawn wrote on Monday, the 9th of March, in his blog for America Magazine. With Hans Urs von Balthasar, I hold that, quote, either the character of Christian revelation is seen and grasped in its entirety as the glorification of absolute love by itself, or it is not perceived at all. Close quote. That notion that to be a Catholic is to go first and foremost to the glorification of absolute love by itself, to pursue that glorification in the public forum by the mediated process of faith and reason, is what Michael Shawn stands for. And while we may not agree with individual points that he has adduced, I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that Michael Shawn's overall approach is a model of what it means to be a reasonable Catholic in the public forum in the postmodern era. And I thank you.
Thank you.